What we're going to talk about is something very tragic and heartbreaking, and a big crisis facing the Pakistani youth. Pakistanis have been trying to go to Europe. What we do know is that Pakistanis have been trying to take extreme and immense risks to leave the country through some of the most dangerous routes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to say that the Balkan route is actually the main path of these migrants coming from Middle East and South and Central Asia in the Balkans, in the Western Balkans. They enter there most of the times without money and without ID cards or passports, and then they have some little amounts of money in their pockets just to find a kind of shelter to stay for 1 or 2 nights, illegal shelters in Tirana or other cities around the border, and they're asking for the help of the locals. There are a lot of very good laws implemented in accordance to the United Nations and all the conventions. But in practice, there is a lack of good implementation.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to New Wave Global. I'm Rabia Mehmood. Today, we are here in front of you again with a very critical story, which is linked to social justice and human rights. As you know, this is a running theme of some of the shows we are doing here at New Wave Global. What we're going to talk about is something very tragic and heartbreaking, and big crisis facing the Pakistani youth, and in fact, specifically the youth, but also men of all ages in the country and outside the country as well. As you know, that in June, there was a tragedy known as the Greece boat tragedy or Greek boat tragedy, when on the Mediterranean Sea in the Pylos region, hundreds of migrants, asylum seekers and refugees were drowned or allowed to drown as a result of criminal negligence of Greek authorities. But what happened was that a big number of those who drowned and are missing were Pakistanis. And of course, that led to a lot of focus, international focus on what's happening to Pakistani migrants and the numbers in which Pakistanis have been trying to go to Europe. What we do know is that Pakistanis have been trying to take extreme and immense risks to leave the country through some of the most dangerous routes, specifically starting on people do fly out of Pakistan through irregular means and are victims of traffickers, and which are illegal. Not that migrants are illegal, but the some of the steps taken and the routes taken are illegal. But we're specifically talking about the land routes that people have been taken through Pakistan and Iran border, and then the way in which they try and reach Turkey, and then they try and reach Greece, and then Europe. So these are a couple of routes, not just one route, right, to get to Europe that the migrants are taking. They spend a lot of money, they pay a lot of money to traffickers, and we do read stories, and we've looked at some cases where people, young men have been killed by border guards for instance, in Turkey and elsewhere, and they couldn't survive. And then there were people who go missing because they're on those routes for a long time. While we did see a lot of focus on one route as a result of the story and the tragedy in June, but another big, another frequently used route now that we've seen is the Balkans route, which Pakistanis have also taken. Of course, there are others who take these routes as well, Afghans, South Asians, other South Asian Bangladeshis and Indians, and then asylum seekers and refugees like the Syrian refugees, for instance. So now our special guest is a journalist based out of Germany. She's from Albania, Elona Elezi. She's been researching and reporting on what happens to the migrants and asylum seekers on the Balkans routes for years. And her thesis specifically focuses on the treatment of children. And these are people who are trying to get to the Schengen countries. But she has increasingly been researching and reporting on migrants who are adults and specifically Pakistanis as well. Elona, thank you so much for joining us. Elona reports extensively for national and international media and in different formats. Elona, thanks so much for joining us on a very short notice.
Thanks a lot, Rabia, for having me.
Yeah, can you please just, first of all, because we ended up speaking to each other, that's how we know each other, is because you were working on some story, and this was specifically about Pakistanis, because Pakistanis are in huge number. We'll get to that later. But first of all, can you actually explain to our viewers the sort of the nitty-gritty of this route, especially the Balkans one? Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to say that the Balkan route is actually the main path of these migrants coming from Middle East and South and Central Asia in the Balkans, in the Western Balkans. I've been reporting for this topic since 2018, when we had the first information from our police border control that there were increasing number of migrants entering in our territory, which means in the borders we are sharing with Greece. In Kapshtica and Kakavie, mainly in the southeastern part of Albania, they were crossing mountains, they were putting their life in danger just to enter our country, and of course using it as a transit country to go then in Europe.
Okay, so that's the route. Can you then sort of tell us what sort of difficulties are people facing and how it got complicated? We saw some stories last year when the border police was using force against migrants and asylum seekers. Well, what kind of complications are they met with on this on this route? Yes.
Well, I can start from Albania. Usually, if they're not reporting that they're not facing any kind of violence, they're entering from Greece, as I mentioned earlier, and in the moments that they're being detected from the police and the Frontex police officers, because since I guess 2019, if I'm not wrong, we have Frontex police officers in this border with Greece. Frontex EU border control management of the borders agency. So they have this readmission, they go through this screening process once they enter Albania, they have this health screening and so on. And then after this procedure, some of them are being kept in this kind of shelters, built from NGOs, international NGOs presence in Albania. And then after going through this whole process needed, they are being sent back to Greece. So far in Albania, there are no violence cases reported, but during the whole route through the Balkans, for example, there are several cases in Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina for sure. They are reporting time after time for a tough violence happening there, in North Macedonia also. So this is actually the route. They enter from Greece via land. We have to say, especially Pakistani migrants I've been interviewing. They are entering, they follow the land route from Turkey, they enter to Greece, and then from entering from Greece to Albania, they go to Montenegro, from Montenegro to Croatia, who is a European country. And their final destination, I guess, is Italy. All the Pakistani migrants I've been meeting all these years, for more than 5 years, they have families and relatives in Italy, and their final destination is Italy.
But can you also just walk us through some of your based on some of your findings, because you've been talking to Pakistani migrants for the past 5 years, as to who are these people that they are paying on all these routes? Are they just sort of organically just deciding based on their research as to how to go forward? Because some of the people that I've spoken to have talked about how they were traffickers or agents, Pakistanis mostly, in each of these destinations, or in these regions that they are paying, and they're kind of like sort of helping them move from point A to B to C. So yes, can you please walk us a bit through that?
Of course. First of all, I have to say that Pakistani migrants are in the top 5 countries using this Balkan route to enter European Union countries. We have migrants from Afghanistan, Syria, Pakistan, Morocco, and the 5th is Bangladesh. So they are using this Balkan route in huge numbers. If we compare 2021 and 2022, there's a slight decrease of the percentage of Pakistani migrants entering, but still it's considered quite high. Well, I think there is a well-organized human trafficking network. There are people abusing with this sad and miserable stories of the migrants. From my research so far, what I know is that, and also sometimes from the reports of the Albanian police, is that there are Pakistani people involved in this network, which means that most of them are based in Greece and collaborating maybe with Albanian locals. They are organizing this illegal route to the Balkans. And from what I've interviewed, Pakistani migrants, they told me that they paid around $2,500 till $5,000 to go through this route and to go to their final destination, which mainly is Italy, as I mentioned. So yes, they're most of them are well organized. They're finding these kind of smugglers even in the social media. There are kind of social medias helping to spread the news. Some of them are using the contacts that have been doing this route in the past and now are in Italy. And there are the smallest percentage of the people are organizing it themselves because they don't have this amount of money to pay. So they just use this this MapMe, and they enter the route and they take this risk that is higher when you compare it to the risk that you have when you are part of a group. So there are all kinds of categories.
Yeah, yes, you're right about that. And in fact, this sort of racket, even if it's one racket or this more extensive one, or these are different traffickers collaborating, it starts from Pakistan and it goes from the border in Pakistan-Iran border, then at various points in Iran, and then in Turkey, and then Greece, and then in different countries. And you're right, I mean, the number of people who kind of choose to take these routes themselves are more at risk by themselves, and they do use Google Maps, and they switch off, they kind of like save routes, switch off their SIMs just to—
They're using screenshots time after time when they don't—
to save themselves from being detected while on these routes. It's quite unfortunate. And yes, there are Pakistanis or South Asians or people of other nationalities, but usually people who were previously, irregular migrants themselves, who are exploiting these people when they reach different countries in Europe as well, in the Schengen countries, specifically in Greece. And that continues on to how they're exploited when they are trying to find work in their final countries of destination. Can you also just, you spoke about just like the horrific conditions in which they are they've paid so much money and they barely have anything on them, and how they are taking these risks. Can you give us paint us a bit of a picture of like how these people are surviving on these routes, because these could be extreme weathers as well that they're not used to. We're coming from coming from Pakistan. Can you share some of that?
Yeah. Once they enter the border, I mean, the whole challenge is to cross the border. When they enter the border, their intention is not to stay in Albania, because Albania is a poor country and they want to migrate, as we said, in the European Union. They enter there most of the times without money and without ID cards or passports. And then they have some small amount, little amounts of money in their pockets just to find a kind of shelter to stay for 1 or 2 nights, illegal shelters in Tirana or other cities around the border. And they're asking for the help of the locals to help them with the ID and to withdraw money from the MoneyGram or Western Union, because the family and relatives they have in Italy, France, or wherever in Europe and the world, they're sending them their money. But you know that to withdraw this money, you must have an ID card, for example. So there, I think most of the time they're being helped by the locals, because, you know, it's also cultural, it's a cultural mindset. Us Albanians, we've been migrants ourselves in decades, in centuries. So if somebody is going to say, can you please help me? I just want to take some money to buy some food, to buy some bread and so on. People are helping, even in Tirana, in the capital, and in the small cities for sure, but even in the capital, they're asking for help. They're giving their ID cards. I know it's illegal, but they're helping these people to survive for a certain amount of days, for 3, 4, till they find the taxi drivers to go, for example, to Montenegro, because taxi drivers are also part of the problem in the network. So people that are not paying these amounts of money because they cannot afford, and they're entering Albania with their free will, just following the route they know. They're staying there for some days till they find somebody that can transfer them to Montenegro. So it's a kind of difficult. In the past, there were some, I know some cases that they were living inside the mosques for so many days, for example, because they knew that maybe the police would never search there, or maybe they asked for help from somebody. So in the mosques around these borders and these cities, they were staying for 2 or 3 nights, sleeping there illegally, and then traveling to the route they want to follow.
Can you speak to us a bit about if there is about what are the policy challenges in terms of when you speak to authorities in Albania or EU, whatever you know, based on your research, and you know, because it's fairly dehumanizing, the policies, and
Definitely.
yes. So can you expand a bit on that? Yeah.
Yes, but you know, the feeling is that when you talk to these policymakers, their first thought is each of the countries want to protect its own borders. So we have to bear this in mind. It's an EU action plan since 2022 with the Western Balkans countries. I know it's implemented in Albania, in Montenegro, in Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm not sure about North Macedonia, if it's in force yet, but is this action plan for the readmissions in order that, collaborating with the international NGOs, once a person is being detected that he's entering illegally in the border, they go through this process, I said, and in theory, they have to go through readmission. But the problem is when you send them back to Greece or to other countries, what will happen with them? You know, Greece police in the last years, there have been reports saying that they're abusing the migrants. The conditions in the shelters are against human dignity and so on. The point, they're doing also pushbacks. So the point is, each of the countries, of the governments, must deal with these problems, not only in the paper, because if you think only about the paper, you sign these agreements, you implement them, you just send people back. But most of the people who are coming are refugees from the conflict zones, or are even from Pakistan or Bangladesh. They are reporting insecurity, lives they're living in their countries of origin. So it's not enough to take care only for the papers and the policies and the agreements they sign. It's about human dignity. You have to think about people. Okay, of course, when they go to this screening process, there are a lot of migrants with criminal records. They belong to another category. But if you see women, wives, mothers with children, you have to be more careful. you have to think about their rights, because they didn't choose, even migrants, not only refugees that they never choose to leave the country, but even migrants. I'm trying to have a better life, and I'm leaving Pakistani because I want to have a better life. And even they're going to send me back, this should have done in a proper way, not to abuse with human rights and so on. So what I see is that we have, and even the European Union in the paper, there are a lot of very good laws implemented in accordance to the United Nations and all the conventions. But in practice, there is a lack of good implementation, and sometimes it's, I say, it's an unhuman treatment of the migrants and refugees in our borders.
Okay, Elona, thank you so much. This was very insightful. Specifically, the sort of treatment of the migrants on these on the Balkans routes, and what exactly is this route taken by Pakistanis and other migrants and asylum seekers, and the nitty-gritty of what happens in those countries, because we have little reporting on this, and specifically in Pakistani media, we have very little reporting. And that your comment about the dehumanizing and sort of treatment of migrants in a way, migrants and asylum seekers in a way that it violates all their, it's against human dignity, and it violates all those obligations and standards which these countries are bound to meet. Thanks so much. And thank you to our viewers for watching this show. Khuda Hafiz.